Good evening. This is Simone Tarver, chair of this commission. Hope everyone's having a good evening so far, and hopefully everyone's out there staying healthy. We'll start with our roll call. So, Mary Fosse.
If you're here, you'll have to turn yourself off mute and say here.
Did you hear me?
Now I hear you.
Okay. Yeah, present.
Chris Geray. Present. Jim Langus.
Jim, if you're here, you'll have to unmute and say here.
Yes.
Thank you. Ethel McNeal.
She was having some technical difficulties, so she'll be on soon.
Okay. John Monroe. We'll circle back to him. Kari Quas.
Present.
And Simone Tarver here. Ben Young.
Present.
And Julius Wilson.
Present.
Perfect. So now we'll move on to the approval of our March minutes. So I move to approve the March minutes as they are in the email Nichole sent us.
I make that motion.
Okay, perfect. So I guess we'll go down the roll call to do approval. So Mary Fosse?
Yes.
Chris Geray? Jim Langus?
Yes.
Ethel McNeal? We'll hold off and see if we get her in a second. John Monroe? We'll circle back. Kari Quas?
Yes.
Simone Tarver, yes. Ben Young?
Yes.
Julius Wilson?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll move on now to staff comments.
I just want to remind everyone to please announce yourself. If there's any doubt that the community might not know who's speaking, please announce yourself. And also make sure that you speak loud enough into your microphone or at your computer screen that we can hear you. We're having a little bit of problems hearing Chris Geray. So if we're having a hard time, probably the community is. That is all I have to say. I think we will then transition into item 1. So Tony Fairfax, our Districtine Commissioner, is going to share, our Districtine Master is going to share his screen, and that will begin our presentation for the day.
First, let me say I hope everyone is well and healthy on the West Coast. We are pulling for you all to come out of this because I think you all are the precursor to what happens here on the East Coast. Before I begin the slide presentation, I just wanted to make a brief comment on the document that appears very similar to the documents on the neighborhoods that were passed out. And so I'm looking at the document that has non-neighborhood demographic, socioeconomic, and lifestyle attributes. And so we're not going to go over this in detail. I just want to explain what it was, what it is. A commissioner last week mentioned a particular area, I believe it was right above the Silver Lake neighborhood, and wondered what was the demographic and socioeconomic makeup of that area. And so after the meeting, I thought about it, and it made no sense to actually only provide that area. So what I did was I provided the demographic, socioeconomic makeup of all these non-neighborhood areas throughout the city. And so that's what this is. This is basically the same document or very similar document, except it's looking at those non-neighborhood areas. And turned out that most of them are low in population. There's a couple that may have 100 to several hundred individuals, but the other ones are very, very, very small in populations. And thus the enrichment program that Esri does is probably most likely not accurate in the depiction of that because it only has a handful of people to pull from. That said, we can use it as information, and I believe that more information is better than no information at all or less information. We can make some determining factors. So look at that at your leisure, and then you can come back next month, and if you have any questions on that. The focal point of this particular session is the analysis of the plans that I created, and I'm bringing that up now, for separating Northwest Everett and Delta neighborhoods, or combining the Northwest Everett and Delta neighborhoods. And that's the sole purpose of this. These may or may not be plans that we actually look and adopt. Right now, they're just analysis plans. And so they're just used to make a determination of what's the impact of separating or combining these particular neighborhoods. So that's the lens that I think we have to view it from. I'm moving to slide 2 if those do not have video. And so once again, the objective really was just to develop 2 plans for analysis purposes. One to separate Northwest Everett and the Delta neighborhoods, and then one to combine the neighborhoods. And of course, you know, I'm going to follow, and I followed the districting criteria that's set forth, and the state as well as the city. And then attempt to also include the suggested district cores, because that's the whole purpose of this. And let me just reiterate about the district cores. Remember, the district cores are the seeds of these districts, as I mentioned in that first meeting and several meetings. And so the purpose is, we don't have any districts. We being Everett, don't have any cores or any areas that have existed in the districts. So our first step is to decide or determine, what are these core areas? What are the seeds of these districts? And from that, we're going to expand now the areas around those cores, those seeds, if you will. And then along the way, as I was doing plan development, I observed what I was doing and the problems or advantages, let's say, or disadvantages of each. And so at the end, I compared the configuration. I have an observation slide that I'll show you. And then, of course, I looked at, and we will look at sort of key statistics, deviation, race and ethnicity, and compactness. And these are just standard things that you would look at. This is not anything out of the norm, let's say. I'm now on slide 3. And so first, and by the way, I'm going to break off. I'm going to go back and forth between the map and the slide presentation so we can look at it, because the PDF is a much better image and depiction of the configuration than trying to place it on a PowerPoint presentation. And so the first one is the Northwest Everett and Delta neighborhoods separated. So this one talks about the separation in the neighborhoods for Delta were rather Riverside, along with Delta, Port Gardner, a part of it, Glacier View, a part of it, Lowell, Pinehurst, Beverly Park, a part of it, and then Valley View. And then the Northwest Everett was Northwest Everett, Bayside, Port Gardner, a part of it, and South Forest Park, and then View Ridge, Madison, a part. And the dividing lines, as we get ready to see, really is Broadway up in the north, then it shifts over to Rucker Avenue, and then at the bottom it turns to Evergreen Way. And that's somewhat a dividing line between these two districts, a major dividing line. And so I'm now going to shift to the map. And, unfortunately, I have to go through this. Okay. And so what you should be looking at is the PDF map of the separated plan. And you can see, I'll first talk about the Northwest Everett. Once again, you can see that Northwest Everett and Bayside, part of Port Gardner, South Forest Park, and then View Ridge, Madison.
Tony, if I could interrupt here,
yes.
That's not what we're seeing. That's not what's on my screen. I'm still seeing the slide, the previous slide.
Let me see. I think every time. Okay. Do you see it now?
Yeah.
Yes.
We can see it
Yes.
now.
Okay. Apparently, every time I shift to a different program, I may have to share it again. So that's good. Excellent. I appreciate that, definitely. And so let me backtrack and say that let's talk about District 1, which is the Northwest Everett District. And as I mentioned before, Northwest Everett goes down to Bayside. And we had no choice but to go down to Bayside because we're splitting it. We don't want to go over to Riverside. Doesn't make sense because Delta needs to go to Riverside. So we're forced to go to Bayside. We're forced now to go to Port Gardner. We could go a little bit further, and I'll explain that a little bit further east, and I'll explain that in a second. But we have no choice but to go to Port Gardner. And then in order to meet population, we have to add in South Forest Park and View Ridge, Madison, a significant amount of View Ridge, Madison, in order to meet the population deviation. Now, what I mentioned before was that I could have gone a little bit further east, but if I did go a little bit further east, I would have to encompass, and I don't know if you see my cursor, but I'd have to encompass these areas in Port Gardner all the way to the Interstate I-5. And if I did, then District 2, which I'll explain in a second, would have to go and squeeze through that narrow point between Interstate I-5 and the city boundaries all the way down. And that's a possibility, although that makes the district much less compact than normal, but it is a possibility. And so again, we could look at that if you want. So now let me go through Delta. The Delta neighborhood would be combined with Riverside. And once again, it has no choice. If we go to Bayside, it doesn't make sense to split Bayside, so we have to go down south. And then it has no choice but to gather Port Gardner. So we're forced into going down there. It's just a matter of how much we're going. And then in order to meet the population or bring the district within population deviation, we have to garner much further down south because these areas right here, these precincts are less populated than the ones over here in the Northwest Everett district. So it has to go further down south to garner population. Now, once again, we could move a little further west, but then what are we doing? We're taking area away from District 1, again, away from the Northwest Everett. So if we did that, then of course Northwest Everett would have to go down further. So it's sort of a balancing act as you're drawing plans. There's always a trade-off in the traditional redistricting criteria and as well the districts that we're creating. And so I just continued on down and until I got to Valley View, and then it was within population deviation. Let me ask, are there any questions so far?
Mary Fosse here. I have a question.
Yes.
Is there a possibility with, I know this is getting into the detail, but why is there kind of Glacier View taking a chunk out of that? And Pinehurst Beverly Park is divided up into like 3 different districts there. Is there is there room for adjustment when we're looking at final maps and things like that, where we don't do that and maybe it's only divided up twice?
Right. There's a possibility of that, but the problem is that if we traded this off, then we'd have to make that up with other precincts that aren't the same size. And what has occurred is when you trade off one, there may be a much larger precinct that you have to go through, and that means you have to do another trade-off somewhere else. And that's the problem when we get down to here, and that's the reason why I did that. But once again, time and energy and effort is everything, meaning that the more time and energy you spend on multiple configurations, or I spend, let's say, and there may be a way to do what you're saying, to limit the splitting of each of these neighborhoods so it wouldn't be 3 versus 2. So there may be a way. But I believe the reason why I did that was because the trade-off meant trading off not only here, but trading off somewhere else that messed that area up. And so I just stuck with this. But if I would have stayed and spent a few hours more, maybe I could have come up with it. And this is somewhat of example. This is not, again, a finalized plan. This is once again, providing some type of analysis or giving us some type of impact of what occur if we separate the two districts, or the two neighborhoods rather. But good question. Yeah, you don't want to try to split 3 neighborhoods into 3 districts, or 1 neighborhood into 3 districts. Any other questions? And I'll go back to the slide. Sorry about that. All right. And so the next one is the combined plan. And so the combined plan has, as I just went over, Northwest Everett, Delta, Bayside, part of it, Riverside, Port Gardner part, and it's dividing the precincts north into the east of downtown Everett. And so let me change slides. And let me backtrack and show you that the separated plan includes all the cores that we came up with. However, it split that one core that contained Boulevard Bluffs and Harbor View Seacrest. And so the combined plan actually combines Northwest, Delta, and most of Riverside. Now, the reason why this little piece, I don't know if you can see, there's a little piece right there that is a chunk. That's a precinct that overlaps a neighborhood. Unfortunately, some of these precincts actually overlap neighborhoods. They don't match neighborhoods exactly. And so it's a matter of whether you want it inside or whether you want it outside. You're going to split. And I chose it to carve out this way simply because of this area right here that I'd actually wanted to create. And this is just my choice. I created this second district, so the downtown area, actually the majority of the downtown area was included all the way down, as we see, to Lowell and Valley View. And so that's the downtown to Lowell and Valley View. I could have taken that off right there, added it on to District 1, but then I would have cut through Riverside and most likely taking this taken this eastern portion of Riverside. And so it was a matter of 6 1/2 dozen. I wanted to show a plan if you had, I think, the bulk of the downtown area in a separate district other than District 1, what would occur, and that's what it was. But I could have actually added this back to District 1 and removed it equal population from Riverside. And so the interesting thing about this combined plan is that, of course, you can create a very nice compact district for District 1. And you'll see when I talk about some observations very similar to that. Both of these, and let me go back now to the slide presentation. Now, some of the observations that I had along the way, both the Northwest Everett and Delta districts, if they're separated, they must encompass neighborhoods that are areas to the south, all the way going down to the center of Everett. I think we saw that. The Delta district, however, must encompass additional areas down south because on that east side, they're less populated, they're lower populated precincts. So it's going to have to go down further down south. But both of the Northwest Everett and the Delta district plans, both of those plans are capable of including the other suggested district cores, excluding that one where we had to actually break up the Madison, I believe it was View Ridge, Madison neighborhood. The other district cores could be included in the districts. And those other districts would not necessarily have to be changed. So either plan, and I'll go back to this, either plans can create the same districts down south. And that's what I did in this plan. So just to give you an idea. And once again, these are just for examples' sake. They're not in stone. These districts 4 and 5 are the same in each of the plans. And that was done intentionally, just to show that the configuration didn't impact those districts really. And so the configuration of either plan, you can come up with at least similar districts down south. So both of them, it's sort of a wash, if you will, which district configuration you use, whether separated or combined. The southern districts, if you will, should be the same as long as they remain down south. All right. And so I do have that notation that the separated plan configuration will most likely take away from the View Ridge Madison neighborhood. The only other choice, again, is to come up with a slim, thin area for that Delta district on the east side. And so if you take away precincts on that side, you can eliminate taken away from the View Ridge Madison. And so most likely it's once again, it's the coin toss. It makes the district less compact, but that may be the desire of the city, a desire of the commission for some particular reason. And as I said before, both plans do not necessarily change the southernmost district. When you look at compactness, and I'm going to go through these the reports, which basically the equal population or the population statistics are not that much difference really. The compactness reports a little, but the compactness comparing the compactness between the two plans, the combined neighborhoods may allow for a more compact district. So just for example, if we look at these reports, and these are just standard reports that Maptitude produces, this is a district statistic report, and we see that there's not that much difference between the deviations between the combined and the separate plan. The racial makeup is not that much difference. The districts down below were the ones that really had any type of minority population. But the compactness, for example, there are 3 compactness measurements that I normally use: the Rioch, Polsby-Popper, and the convex hull. And I explained that in the Redistricting 101 and went through each one. But if you have a question, feel free to ask. But one of the ways you can quickly look at the plan is to look at the mean. So you're just looking at the overall mean or average of all the compactness measurements. And if you look at the separate and then look at the combined, you can see just a slight difference. So for example, we have 40, 33, and 74 as the mean for the separate. If we go down to the other plans, we have 43 slightly higher, 34 slightly higher, and 78 slightly higher. So the combined has an overall, slightly better compactness measurements and ratios than the separate. And that's most likely because of those 2 irregular districts that are coming down, the Delta and the Northwest neighborhood districts. And so the final thoughts that I have, both of these plans, both the separated and the combined plans appear to fall within the boundaries of what I would consider acceptable configurations. So, although you have some irregular configurations with those the separated districts, it still falls within the boundary of what would be considered acceptable. However, when you're combining the districts, and you're looking at an overall better configuration, you're looking at compactness, and then looking at restricting the configuration of the other districts, the combined neighborhoods, and rather I should have said combining the neighborhoods versus the districts, combining the neighborhoods actually provides you a better overall compactness, as well as it doesn't restrict you as much. Because of those 2 elongated districts that come down, the remaining districts are sort of hamstrung in what they can do in the configuration that they have. And so if I had to pick which one would be better, I would lean toward the combined neighborhoods. And so that's sort of the brief summary of the analysis. Any questions do you have?
Simone, I'll have you call down the list of commissioners one at a time for this one.
Okay. So let's start with Mary Fosse. Questions, comments?
By saying, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. By saying better, do you mean just in the terms of it being compact and easier to draw the lines within the other neighborhoods?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
And then for when we're looking at the combined plan with District 2, I was just wondering if anyone had any insight to combining, I guess, a district with downtown Everett with maybe, I don't know, Lowell or something like that, and if that seemed like a natural combination.
So I think is that conversation going to help the commission? This is Nichole Weber, staff. Is that conversation going to help us determine whether or not to split North Everett down the middle, east and west, or north and south? Would be my question on that.
Well, Lowell's considered one of the core areas, correct? And then downtown was considered one of the core areas, correct? Yes?
We didn't, that's one of our decision points. We didn't solidify the downtown area.
I
It
was
was, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Because just looking at the map, that changes whether you're combining those core areas like with Rucker Hill, and you're combining the lower population areas to the right, that changes whether you're looking at one map or the other.
Right. One of the things that I think we left hanging was whether we were going to use Lowell as one of the core. And I think at the end I mentioned I'm just going to assume that Lowell is a core for this analysis, and attempted to do that. The other the other one is we mentioned the downtown area, and I recalled that, but we never really solidified it. But remember, we don't have to include the downtown area inside this District 2. This is just what I select. This area right here, as I mentioned before, could be placed in District 1. And then Riverside.
For those on the phone, Tony, can you be a little bit more specific about when you say areas right here?
Okay,
Can you be a little more specific? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I forgot that some people are just listening. So if we remove that the downtown area that's included in Bayside in District 2 and added it to District 1, and that would be the combined, and I'm speaking of the combined map. If we added that, that could be done. And then what would occur would be the removal of some areas from, or precincts from Riverside. And so it would balance out that. So it doesn't have to, the downtown doesn't have to be included in Lowell. It could be included in the Northwest Everett. And so that's a decision that can be made on alternative plans once we begin to actually develop the plan, whether we want to include that or not. But in order to make this determination of splitting or separating or combining, recognizing that both of those can occur. The downtown area that's in Bayside can be added to one, but it would be the removal of some areas in Riverside, but it can go either way.
Okay. And then can I have the question reiterated, what we're commenting on specifically from Nichole?
Yeah. The question that I asked?
Yes.
I was just curious if the conversation about having the downtown area combined.
No, I
with
meant prior to that, where we're going from person to person. We're just opening up discussion. Is that what this is?
No. Simone is going to call down each commissioner one at a time to provide comment or ask questions. And you were first.
Okay. I'm just slightly concerned that the data that I was hoping to have for this regarding voter turnout is not provided in this discussion. Reason being, along that west side area, there is significant voter turnout in several precincts over there that really quite dwarfs the other side. And I think that is relevant information to have when kind of looking at the different areas and how diverse they may be. But conversation.
Commissioner, I understand. I think I understand your concern, and I'm going to look at that. I'm going to obtain the data and then look at that. There's nothing to stop us from revisiting something if we find some red flag or something down the road. And so, rest assured that can occur. That said, offhand, when we're looking at lower turnout, we're usually talking about And I think you might have mentioned stacking. We're usually talking about minority population. And fortunately or unfortunately, there's such a small amount of minority population that's integrated in this area, this Delta area, that once you begin to add Riverside and go down to Lowell and that separated district, it also gets masked as well. And so there's not that much difference. There may be some lower turnout precincts in this area, but I would say it's probably not significantly lower. And I shouldn't say it without analyzing, but I would say right now it's probably not significantly lower to make any difference. So unfortunately, these precincts that probably have some type of minority population that turns out a lower amount probably are going to get masked with the sheer population because it's not a significant amount of them. But I will look at that.
Yeah, well, see, with those numbers, though, I mean, when we were looking at the different neighborhoods, and I don't want to berate this, but I mean, we had one of the highest diversity indexes, and we have a larger population up there. And if you do look at the different precincts, I mean, the voting turnout, we don't have the data, but I know from my own research and looking at just the 2016 primaries, Northwest neighborhood, there's portions of it that were over 50% of turnout, while Delta was half of that. And I'm sorry I don't have more information for the other areas, but I mean,
Right.
That's as far as my knowledge goes. And so that's why I have concerns, because I know along the whole entire Bay, I don't want to say Bay side, but the Bay View area on the west there, I have a hunch that the turnout is going to be a lot higher going along that kind of Bay area rather than it is on the Snohomish Riverside.
So I've noted,
this is-
Mary, that you have that you want the data for the voter turnout. I'm sorry we weren't able to get that ready for today's meeting, given the
We can move on.
given COVID. But I think
Just
we need
noting
to
my
move on
concern.
down the
Yep.
list. I've noted that, and I think if other people have concerns with that, we can bring this back up for discussion, and I will request that voter data for you to review.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I did want to hop in really quick. This is Simone. In the email that Nichole sent us out, she resent it shortly or about just before, or she sent it to us just before 5. There's a document from the Everett City Council attached to one of those comments that someone in the community sent us. And there is information from the 2010 to 2014 American Community Survey that shows that when you're looking up at that Delta area in Riverside and Lowell, that there are several precincts in that area that do have less than 30% voter turnout, and how that voter turnout of less than 30% correlates to our areas that have more or Black, Asian, Hispanic population above the city average. So that is something that we all do have access to. If we look in our emails right now, we can move on to the next person, but as we're all sitting at our computers, especially you, Mary, that we do have that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I can send it to you.
Simone, I'm gonna just say that what I would like to provide this body is the 2017 data, because that's when we had the mayor running and a few other council members on the ballot. And so, yes, absolutely look at that for now and get as much information as you can, but know that we will be providing that 2017 package, which will have more relevant recent information on it. And so I think you can just call the next person.
Yeah, so one of the next one, but I bet dollars to donuts it's not going to be that much different just on my knowledge of living in this community. But we'll move on to Chris Geray.
With respect to that last point, I think it's also relevant to note that I think we need to be examining data that's provided by Tony rather than public comment. I don't know the source of that, so I think we should keep that in mind. So question for Tony, back to the compactness reports. I was wondering if you could add a bit of context to those numbers. You said that both of them are reasonably close, but you personally noted enough of a difference that you felt like it was relevant. So could you talk about what those the mean numbers mean in terms of that difference, how significant that is? And then also one of the things that I was noting, and you can comment whether it's terribly relevant, is when you look at the district numbers, by district 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it appears to me that the combined segment has a lot closer numbers between District 1 and District 2, whereas if you look over to the separate one, it goes down to 54 and 18, which is dramatically different. So while the means might be close, it seems to me that might indicate there's a pretty dramatic difference in that compactness for at least those two districts.
Well, one of the ways that you quickly analyze, and I didn't go into any detail analyzing each of the districts by each of the districts. One, you can look at each of the compactness measurements along each of the districts and compare whether 2 out of the 3 of this particular district would mean that this is more compact, or 3 out of 3 or 1 out of the 3 on each of the measures are more compact. I didn't do that. I did a cursory look and looking at the mean. And looking at the mean as well as looking at some of the districts, for example, District 1 for the combined, clearly is a compact district. We can, if I go to the combined district, if it's District 1 or is it District, hold on a second. Yeah, District 1. Just a second, please. There we go. Clearly, District 1 is more compact. We've got the REAC measurement, which is 0.43, 0.54, 0.55.
And I don't think the people on the phone right now can follow what it is that we're looking at. So if we could provide a little explanation around what it is that we're looking at right now, that'd be helpful.
Sure. What I was looking at was the analysis of the compactness measurements. And let me say that, and I need to go back to I'm doing compactness measurements now one by one. 4.880, and then 8.7, and then 0.1. What I'm doing is I'm doing a district by district compactness and looking at them. I didn't do this before. 0.33, and that one actually has is more compact. And so
I guess really the crux of my question is the means might be very similar, but I think a lot of times when you look at something holistically, you lose a lot of the detail that can mask some pretty dramatic differences. And that appears to be what it looks like to me, is that in the separated, you've got 54 and 18 versus 43 and whatever the other one was that were a lot closer. And so I guess my question is that as relevant as it appears to me and as dramatic a difference?
I would say that you look at a plan wholly. You don't look at a plan from the point of view, and I just realized what's going on. With District 1, although it appears to be much more compact, because it was a question, this area right here, what we're doing is this area that's an island is that's bringing that compactness measurement down. So although it appears circular, And any type of districts that's circular should be a much more compact district. And so we're getting a false reading right here because we have this island that's included in there. What I would really have to do was to combine the blocks that are inside here and the blocks that are there inside the water in order to get a true compactness measurement. But I can tell, looking at the overall compactness measurement, and I understand what you're saying, you look at the individual ones to really glean out. But you can see just by, I hate to say by experience, but you can see by the separated districts here, that is going to give a higher compactness measurement. This elongated one is going to give a higher compactness measurement usually, just by the virtue of it being long and the way compactness is calculated by usually a circle being drawn and then the measurement being taken by the area of the district, say for the area of the circle. I don't want to get into too much detail. But what is, and I'm glad you brought this to my attention, what is making this District 1 less compact in the combined plan is most likely this area right here, and then no area here, meaning that this is actually part of the district, but the compactness measurement isn't including it because I only combined the land area. I didn't combine the water area, if you will, and so it's given a somewhat of a false sense. But I can see that just by experience that the combined plan has District 1 that's a compact district. And District 2 is much more compact or more compact than the District 1 here or the District 2 here. I have to now go back and do that type of analysis. And so what I was doing was just a cursory overview of looking at the plan from the overall plan measurements, which you get from the mean, basically.
Tony, I'm going to just interrupt real quickly. We need to try to be as concise as possible, as we've only gotten through 2 commissioners and we've been on questions now for over 15 minutes. So I just want to put that out there, everyone. We just need to be a little more concise or we will be on this call for 5 hours.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, let me back up and let me answer your question with this. Yes, you are correct that in order to truly look at the compactness measures, you have to look at district by district. What I was looking at was just an overall measurement of the entire plan, just to give an idea. Since we're not doing any type of detailed analysis right now, we're just looking at a broad stroke. That's number one. Number two, the reason why I see that this combined plan is less compact for District 1 is because the water isn't included in here. And because of the water is included, that's area that actually lowers that compactness measurement. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I get a general sense of what you're saying. I think it is an important and relevant part of this, since the decision specifically is basically around these 2 plans. So I think looking at the specific numbers for those 2 districts is important. So anyway, thank you.
Yes. And I can go back. I can go back and actually do some analysis with the blocks included. Unfortunately, the blocks include this particular area right here that gives us a false sense of compactness too. But you're right. As Ms. Weber said, let's move on. Appreciate the comment though.
Alrighty, perfect. Next, Jim Langus, you're on the line. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you. I don't know if I have questions, but I do have some observations. I've been taking notes while I've been listening. You know, it seems like we get distracted at times by looking at core areas as the first step in the formation of districts. It becomes easy for personal feelings to creep in. But we are not deciding. We're deciding core areas, not districts. And I go back and forth on the video that Spitzer made, and what we've been told by the law professor in terms of applying basic legal rules under state law. And Mr. Fairfax said earlier today, under his objectives, that he was trying to follow the guidelines. He said basic state law, and then he said something about city districting criteria, which there aren't any. We have to follow the state law, and that's what he's. And it seems to me like we have 5 core areas, and that's what we need to decide. And they may not be perfect, but there are 5 core areas. We have West Everett, which is west of Forest Park, goes to Buckleteal and takes in Lower Ridge, Upper and Lower Ridge. We have North Everett, which encompasses the Northwest, Bayside, Delta, and Riverside area. That's 2 core areas. We have Southeast Everett, which is the Silver Lake area, which is east of 526, proceeds along 19th Avenue and includes all of what is referred to as Silver Lake and much area east of I-5, although when it comes to the time when we have to determine districts to achieve the population numbers for Silver Lake, it's going to require an alignment of interests with some other neighborhoods. That's kind of the third one. The fourth one is South Everett, which is south of 526 and Boeing Freeway and from Casino Road south, and includes Westmont and Hawley and in some ways other adjoining neighborhoods. This is similar to Silver Lake in that when it comes time to determining districts, to achieve the population numbers, we're going to have to require another alignment with other areas to be able to get the population numbers. Now, Central Everett, which is Central Everett South, is a hard district to describe, but this is a core. And Central Everett includes neighborhoods, it includes housing types, services, schools, shopping, and more. It's a key area in the city, and that Central Everett is the 5th one. And I have to leave that description to Mr. Fairfax. But I guess in closing, to run the segregated plans, north and south, all the way to include Valley View for one, and all the way into View Ridge for the other, is almost like trying to become way too creative in forming core areas. I mean, if you look at the maps as an example, and what we've seen tonight, View Ridge is now in Northwest Everett in the segregated plan, and Boulevard Bluffs and Glenwood are now included with Pinehurst. And there are other examples like this. These are no longer core areas. And why even have core areas if that's the approach we're taking? So I think we want to be careful not to set a precedent for how we do our work, because we essentially are getting way away from core areas. And I have my idea of 5. Others of you have your ideas of 5. 2 in North Everett really don't help us. Those are my observations.
Thank you, Jim. Should we move on? Let's see. Ethel, do you have any comments or questions?
Ethel, if you're on mute, you should be able to push #6 to get off mute. If you can hear this, Ethel, #6.
Did I come in clearly, Nichole, or was I?
Yeah, Jim, you were just fine. We can hear you perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no dice for Ethel.
So we'll circle back to her. John Monroe, if you're on the line.
He wrote in and said that he's listening, having technical issues, but has no comment or questions for this.
Okay. Kari.
Hi, it's Kari Quas. So what I was pondering, and maybe I align a little bit with Jim on this one, and that is I'm looking at the 2 long, narrow districts, and I'm trying to look at the charts we had for the 9 suggested core areas at one of our other meetings, and looking at ethnicity and race and income and all of these things. I feel like it would be a trade-off for Delta in extending all the way down to Lowell or Valley View with Northwest. So when I look at compactness, I see where it makes sense to me to have Northwest, Delta, Bayside, Riverside together in one district, mainly from how I think we all sort of think of town. The other comment I would make, and it's a tough one, and I'm thinking of Mary entirely, and I read the public comments too, is that the voter turnout piece is tricky, and I would like to see those statistics because that may play into how the district is actually created at some point in time. But for the purposes of being compact and how, when we look at, in my notes from the last time, I have Lowell, we decided was going to be the core. And the option was that Northwest and Delta together would be the other core, allowing us to have 5 across the city. And that really just makes sense to me. It'll be interesting to see where this finally lands. But like Jim just said, when you take Northwest all the way down into View Ridge, or you take Delta all the way down into Lowell, I think that we end up with very diverse areas, different numbers, and it may be trading one challenge for another, perhaps. So I guess my comment is I kind of like the compactness of North Everett being North Everett. And then beyond that, we have a lot of issues to discuss. But perhaps for the core, a north area is where I would go.
Thank you. And, Simone Tarver, me. Looking at the two options, I think I'm personally leaning more toward having Northwest and Delta split, like each of them being their own core. And my main reasoning is that I just feel like that would better combine communities of interest. I think that when you look, like from my experience of the neighborhoods that would be combined in those two respective districts, I see more similarities with them, though the districts would be a little less compact. But I don't think that the lack of compactness would put us in any like jeopardy of this being illegal or anything, looking at the information we've received thus far on what compactness would mean. So I think part of looking at these districts or looking at these district cores is us using the knowledge that we have as people from these areas and thinking about what makes the most sense to combine. And so I think the conversation so far has been really great. And I think everyone has made some really great points, but that's kind of where I'm leaning, is more toward them being separate. And I'm just gonna make that brief comment. So Ben Young?
Yeah, I look at this and I've been looking at it and I can remember Ethel many times saying that she's concerned with gerrymandering. And when I look at the elongated version of the initial one, the first one that Tony presented, I think that if we allow the voting turnout to determine whether or not we have the elongated version or not, we're doing exactly that in the reverse. I am definitely leaning towards trying to, although I can be persuaded otherwise, the Northwest District, the Delta neighborhood, Riverside, and Bayside, all trying to be as compact as possible. I can be persuaded otherwise, but I just see that as an easy no-brainer. I know the arguments, and I'm very familiar with the arguments or the conversations that have been directed because of the Delta neighborhood itself. But Delta neighborhood, no matter how you look at it, can't stand alone. They can't stand alone. They're not going to be there only because they're in near proximity to the Northwest neighborhood. Sometimes that means that I will reserve that comment. But I just lean towards going with number 2 as opposed to number 1. That's just my comment here. Would I be satisfied with number 1 going first, where we had the split neighborhood of Delta and the Northwest in separate districts? I would be able to live with that comfortably. I would prefer that we don't, though.
Thank you, Ben. And now Julius. Any comments or questions?
No, I don't have any comments or questions. You guys mainly hit. I mean, Chris, the people before me asked all the questions. I was curious about the island, so I'm just looking for the information about the island that Chris pointed out. So no questions, not yet at least. Thank you for asking.
Okay, perfect. Do we want to have more? Do we have any other discussion items that we want to bring up before weeks? I think our next step would be to talk about voting on one or the other.
Can we check in with Ethel and see if she was able to get off mute?
Ethel, are you there?
Doesn't sound like it.
And this is Flora Diaz from Legal. I don't know if it would be possible, Nichole or Pipa or somebody, to try calling Ethel and just put the phone up to the microphone for the Teams meeting so that she can be on speakerphone through her phone instead of going through the Teams meeting, so we can hear from her, because it is important that we be able to hear from her if we can. Thank you.
That's not possible on my end, given my setup. Pipa, are you listening? Do you have ability to do that? It should be #6 if you're calling in from your telephone. If you push #6, if you're on a smartphone, you should just be able to unmute yourself by, clicking the speaker icon.
My suggestion is that if she called in, to call back, because the preset is unmute when you come into a meeting. So Ethel, if you are using a phone line and can't unmute yourself, you can hang up and then call again using that same number that you used.
I had another comment if you want to do that while we're waiting, or I can address this, Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I just asked a question, but I also had some thoughts, and I think Kari pretty eloquently, kind of outlined where my other thoughts were going as I was referring back to some of our other documentation that Tony had provided us with, some of those diversity numbers and minority percents and some of the housing, renting housing. And I agree totally that I think that in some ways, Delta being such a tough fit, you are really trading off, in my mind, when I look at some of those other adjacent neighborhoods to the south. I think in some ways you still have those same challenges, and in terms of diversity, Lowell and Riverside, and some of those are not dramatically different than Northwest. And I know there's probably some history there and some specifics that people can point toward, but that's a pretty compelling argument to me too. And I would agree that the compactness kind of overrides some of that tough fit in one particular situation. So just wanted to mention that as well for people to think through.
Well, but you also got, this is Mary talking, Lowell is like a fifth the size of Northwest. So it's, while they may look relatable, Northwest is significantly larger neighborhood.
Right. I would make the same comments, though, as I mentioned, as far as Riverside and parts of Port Gardner. I felt when I was looking at that data that there was still quite a bit of difference there. It's not like the entire east side is very similar.
Is there anyone else that has comments on Chris's comments or other comments? or Tony, do you want to chime in if you have any information or input?
Well, I concur with what the last commissioner mentioned, which is I think the same challenges are going to occur, whether you integrate Delta with Northwest Everett or you integrate Delta down south. I think that there may be lower turnout precincts that are down south, but I think it's not going to be significant enough to actually make that much different to the voters in the Delta area. But once
Nichole,
again,
this is Ethel. Can you hear me now?
Yes, Ethel. So happy you're here.
Well,
you're up if you have comment.
Yeah, I've been watching it here on the screen too. I'm logged onto my computer as well. I kept saying something, but you evidently couldn't hear me. I agree with what Jim Langus was saying earlier, and with Chris as well. My biggest concern about this whole thing is gerrymandering, and I really would like to know from about. There seems to be a lot of concern about the Delta neighborhood, and I just wonder what's going on here. I don't know. I'm really concerned about the whole thing right now. As I've listened here the whole night of what we've been saying. Like I said, I agree with Jim Langus. I'm concerned about people's personal concerns coming into this thing to build their own little groups. And trust me, gerrymandering will be so large in this city, you won't be able to stand it if we don't do this thing right.
Do we have any other commissioners that would like to provide comment at this time? Final comment on this?
Nichole, I will say this. This is Tony. That the last commissioner, I think, and a couple other commissioners is sort of, I think, right on with the appearance, what I call the appearance of gerrymandering. One of the things that you attempt to do when you're drawing a plan is you try not to have, unless you have to, any irregular shaped districts. And if there are always a red flag for someone to actually point to, because they want to know why is the district configured that way. And there has to be a great reason. And so if the district is configured, let's say in the Delta separated and we go north and south districts, there has to be a rational and logical reason that you tell the citizens of Everett why you actually configured it that way.
Make one other comment as well. With respect to addressing some of the inequities and the reason that we're doing this entire exercise, I feel really good about the fact that we've addressed one of the other major areas of the city, which is down on the south end and Casino Road. And we knew that there would be some trade-offs here, and you can't make everyone happy. And so I feel like with respect to diversity, that bundle down there in the southwest corner of the city, they might have some similar challenges to Delta, and that group will be represented presumably by that district, and that makes me feel a little bit better about, because I am sympathetic to the arguments that are made for Delta as well, and it just seems like a reasonable trade-off from my perspective on that.
Tony, how substantial, this is Nichole Weber's staff, I'm curious how substantial the voter data would need to be as far as being, to allow us to go north and south instead of east and west? Or are there other data combined with that could make this decision make sense? Is my question.
Right, and see, that's where I have a problem. Normally, you would, when you talk about stacking, and you're talking about vote dilution, normally you're talking about breaking the threshold of some type of majority, or at least getting close enough. And I don't think that area in Delta will ever get close to being a majority, if you will. And so usually you're talking about an area, for example, in Mississippi. They just passed 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, where they had a state Senate district, and it was 51% black. But in reality, they stacked it. And so when you looked at turnout, it ended up being really 42, 43, 44% black when you looked at turnout. That was a classic example of stacking. And so meaning that the community there, one assumed that it was a majority minority district, but it wasn't when you included a majority white population. I don't think that Delta included in it comes close to that. I think you're talking about maybe, 15, 20% minority population, versus maybe 26% or something like that. I don't know. But you're not talking about a significant difference, and that's where I have a little problem about the low turnout, because I'm not sure if it'll make a difference. But I think we should look at it, get the data, overlay what are the turnouts for the precincts, and then I won't say change, but I mean, if there is significant, if it makes a significant impact, then maybe change or look at it a different way.
Okay, if no one else has any other comments, I think we're ready to vote on, I guess.
I would like to just respond to what Tony just said.
Okay.
If Jim,
Jim, you sound really far away. We're having trouble hearing you. If you could either get closer to your speaker or speak louder.
Thank you. I will. Voter turnout has never been a criteria, and Mr. Fairfax, it's kind of like the non-neighborhood demographic information that you presented earlier today. You can add a lot of different things, but do they really rise to the level of matters that we should be getting sidetracked on? I know they're important, but are they the key issues? When you think about what the basic laws say about districting, Hugh Spitzer makes it real clear in his video and what he said. The law professor, he said, and I watched it a couple times. He said, a balloon is compact. He said a star or a stake would not be considered compact under state law. And what we have here is a long, elongated area. And I think, as Mr. Fairfax said, when you get refigured areas to make something work, and that's what's happening here. When View Ridge goes one way and Pinehurst goes another way, it throws everything haywire. It's a red flag. And that's the only comment that I have. I agree with Chris. I thank Ben for his comment on gerrymandering, and I understand what he was saying, and that's all. Thank you for letting me weigh back in.
And this is Flora Diaz from Legal, and I do want to reassure the commissioners that although it's very preliminary right now, we don't have our maps. We're hoping that you'll decide on your core areas so that we can then start getting to district draft maps, that certainly it'll be reviewed by our office and then also by our special outside counsel who has done a lot of districting cases before as well. So please focus on the criteria that you have in front of you and on deciding what makes sense to you as a core area. And just know that we will also review these in more detail with you and let you know if we have concerns.
Thank you, Flora. Any other comments or questions?
Just one last thing. I just want to make sure that it's clear. I think it's a very valid point of the Delta being integrated into sort of higher turnout precincts if there was a situation where the minority community was in the majority. I wanted to reiterate that. Or close to the majority, let's say. But I don't think it is the case in this situation. And I want to be clear about that. I'm not saying that we should never look at that, because I believe that the criteria of not diluting minority voting strength is a criteria. And so we should look at where there the turnout, if we actually stacked, if you will. But I don't think that is the case here, and I guess that's what I'm saying. If it was valid, I would be all for it.
This is Ben, and I'm in agreement. I just don't see that that there is enough of a challenge with the ethnic makeup of Delta community for that to be as strong of a comment as it is. And I would, and that is also why I was in agreement with going with situation 2 or the plan on number 2, as opposed to Tony's first iteration where we had the elongated district. The compactness of it, I just thought fit better based upon the criterion that we should be using. And I don't think that while I do know that the Delta has a very unique situation or a unique history, especially as it relates to the Northwest Everett, it is still, they are still a part of Everett. And so I'm leaning more and more in favor of the second one as opposed to the first one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. So I think any other comments, questions? Otherwise, I think we might be ready to vote. So I think what makes the most sense for, and I don't know if we are allowed to do this, is if I go down the roll call and you either say option 1 or option 2. Nicole, can we do that, or do we have to approve, or do we have to?
I think you need to have someone make a motion to let you do that. And then we need to clarify which one is option 1 and which one is option 2.
Yeah. So can I make the motion?
Yeah.
Okay. This is gonna be a weird motion. I move. How should I word this? Because I don't. Do I just pick one and have us vote yes or no on just one of them?
Simone, this is Kari. I just think clarify what option 1 is and clarify what option 2 is, please.
Okay. So I move to bring these 2 maps to a vote. Option 1 will be the map with Northwest Everett and Delta separated. And option 2 will be the map with Northwest Everett and Delta combined. And that's how they appear in the packet too. Number 1 is the first map that appears, and 2 is the second one that appears, I believe, on page 7. So if everyone's familiar with what maps I'm talking about, I'll go down the roll call.
Tony, could you put those maps up on your screen and kind of scroll back between the 2 so the community can see what we're talking about?
Clarification, why are we voting on maps? I thought, we're not voting on core?
We're voting on the core areas as shown in either map 1 or map 2. Does that make sense?
They're outlined as districts, not as core areas, correct?
Correct.
So this would be voting on districts, not core areas.
No, we're voting on core areas as they were broken up on the map. So Simone is just using that as a viewing piece. But the question is so the deciding vote is if we split Delta and Northwest, and Delta becomes the core area and Northwest becomes a core area, or do we combine those two to make them a core area? And
So
the
that's
maps
not the
just
map.
make that easy
Yeah. Okay.
to see.
Sorry, it'd be the map right after the main map. It'd be map page 3 and 8 on the document. Northwest, Everett, and Delta separated and combined narrative and maps final, which is what Tony's showing on the screen.
Gotcha.
I get what your question is.
I think the main or the central aspect of this is whether to separate or to combine Northwest neighborhood with Delta neighborhood. And I think that's a simple vote.
I think that's a great idea.
And
Simone, why don't you just get a motion to read down the list and have people either vote separate or combine. And I think that is a more clear understanding, and I think that will be also easier in the notes to show who voted for what.
Okay, as long as no one has any other questions, we'll start. I move to bring this to a vote, whether we're going to separate or combine Northwest and Delta. So separate would mean that Northwest and Delta are each a core, and combine would mean that Northwest and Delta will be combined into one core. So we'll start. Mary Fosse?
Separate.
Chris Geray?
Vote to combine.
Jim Langus?
He must have got booted off. Let's come back to him.
Okay. Ethel McNeal?
Combine. Go with number 2, option 2.
And John Monroe's not available. Kari Kloss?
John Monroe is having technical difficulties. He texted me combine.
Combine, perfect. Kari?
Combined.
Simone Tarver, separate. Ben Young?
Combined.
Julius Wilson?
Separate.
Okay, so we have 3, and then 3 to 5. And if we hear, Ethel, if you're still there, if you want to vote.
Yes, I did vote. I said I go with 2, combine.
Okay, thank you. We didn't hear you before.
It's Jim Langus that he votes for combined. He wrote in as well.
Okay.
And I'll get written emails from both John and Jim that they voted for combined, just to put with the minutes since they're having technical difficulties. I think that that's fair, unless there's any objections to that.
No, I think that would work fine. Alrighty, so we'll move forward with combining Northwest and Delta as a core area, pending any new information that we get that would cause us to bring this back up and potentially change our decision or shift it in some way.
Great. So do we have any? That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody, so much. I think that was actually very productive. I know that this is kind of rough going through this way, but I think that, we got done what we needed to get done, and I think that was wonderful. Does anybody have any discussion items that they would like to bring forward? Kari, do you want to talk about a communication piece at this meeting, or wait?
Oh, I can bring it up. Yeah, this is Kari. After the last meeting, we had spoken about, and now the whole world has changed. But part of it was to have maybe kind of a blog or a web, like even an email that I could send to Nichole that could be posted onto the Everett website that is a more informal way for us to communicate, because realistically, when it comes to the city and related to the commission is leading this, not the city. And there has to be that line. So I dared to raise my hand to say that I would be happy to write up some sort of, informal but formal, maybe letter or note or memo to Nichole with, how we actually get to consensus on this with the group. I'm not sure. But to just basically say and reiterate, separate from minutes, what's going on and how you can get involved. And here's where you listen. And here's the Facebook event, or if we wanted to go that direction. Whatever it takes, really, to get more people engaged in this process so they're aware of what we're doing. So by the time we get to the public meetings, we're not dealing with, oh, I never knew about it. Oh, that's been happening? And you get all those types of questions. That's what I would like to stay away from. And now, as the world as it sits today, we can't have people sit in the lobby and listen to us. I mean, they can be listening and watching this, which is great. But how do we move forward with some sort of public comment or engagement, or where can that come in? But I think it takes us as the commissioners to invite that, so that too could be a part of this communication. So I guess what I'm looking for there is some sort of either go ahead from the commissioners, or if that's a good idea, or what people think about that.
This is Simone. I think it's a good idea, and I'd be willing to help however you want or however I can. I think the more that we can communicate with the public, and I think the more that we do that, the better.
This is Chris. I was going to say pretty much the same. I think that's a great idea, Kari. Thanks for volunteering for that. I think maybe if you ran it by Simone before publishing might be cool. Other than that, great.
And if once we do get this going, if any other commissioners have any other anything else they would want included in any outreach that we're doing, I'd be happy to take that feedback and loop it in with whatever we end up producing.
Simone, this is Jim. Did I just access again?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I did text and said that I supported the combined. So I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Everything was dropped.
No worries at all. We got your vote counted, and I think Nichole will reach out, or I guess she doesn't really need to reach out since you hopped back on, but she might reach out still to get it in an email just so that we have it all official. But we were just talking about doing some more communication with the community. Kari's going to be helping to lead that.
Yeah, I heard Kari explain what her she was thinking. I think that's great. That's good. So good, really good plan.
Awesome.
Okay, if there's any other comments, let me know. But I heard what you said, Chris, and I think what I would do is I'd write something. I definitely can send it to Simone, and then it could be, I think as Nichole had said when we spoke at the last in-person meeting, then it could be put on city letterhead, but really from us. And so it's noted that it's the commission, but they would put it out through their channels, press releases, and all that kind of thing. So
yeah, and I would just update this is Nichole Weber. I would just update city letterhead to have the Districtine Commission under the logo so people know who it came from, and then we could at the bottom just say, written by, Everett Districtine Commission, and put the date. And then that way it's very clear that you as a body are interacting with the community via our city channels.
That's great. Thanks, Nichole.
All right. Does anyone else have any discussion items, comments, questions?
I'd love Tony to just real quick, if no one has anything else, walk us through very quickly what next steps will be at the next meeting, what we can anticipate seeing.
Perfect. If there's none, then Tony, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, excellent. We're now entering the plan phase or the plan development phase. We still, I think, need to touch base with the neighborhood council, I believe, to get their input on the core areas. But we should not let that stop us from, I guess, moving forward. And so since we've decided on really the core areas right now, we've decided on that northwest section, Boulevard Bluff, I assume Lowell, but we could say either Lowell or downtown. That has to be fine-tuned. Casino Road and then Silver Lake. And so what I will do is come up with a series of map alternatives. I'll take this as somewhat of a starting point, and I'll reconfigure them in a few different ways, come back to you with different configurations, different rationales, let's say, for the modifications. One of them, I'm sure, being I'll remove the downtown area from this District 2, if you can see on that combined map, and place it into District 1, where the Northwest neighborhood of Delta, and then I'll remove some from the east side. And so I know that's one that I will do because there was a comment on that. But I'll come back with some configurations. We'll look at it, or you'll look at it and give me your feedback. In the end, we want to actually have a rationale for each of the district and why that district is configured that way. And so that's what we're shooting for at the end. So
that sounds great. Oh, thank you, Tony. If no one has any other comments or questions, I think I'm ready to move to adjourn this meeting. Oh, I guess because we have our next meeting scheduled, we kept it up on a consistent plan, so it would be May 4th. Right, Nichole?
Yep, I'm just making sure. Yep, May 4th, first Monday in May.
Perfect. So barring any other questions or comments, I move to adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.